Okay, finally we could take a few questions. Okay.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, do you also see a role for us in media exposure, so more positive media exposure in the US, for instance, because it seems that the experience or the influence of having a social role is pretty much influenced by media exposure. So do you see a place for us as a community to have more positive media exposure in the US?
So from my research, I cannot really find correlation between media exposure and their preferences on robots. So I can say it's more like a myth. So rather than just kind of media exposure, what was more important was we need to really understand what are the social dynamics in specific context. So for example, like Confucianism, that works at home in different ways. Confucianism not just talk about like this culture, Korean culture is feminine or masculine. It's more about who are the main worker, like influenced by this Confucianism. So women are the main worker who work at home. So we need to really understand not just, oh, there is this difference, like those countries have different religious like belief kinds of thing, but it's more like we need to go and see what's the social dynamics in that specific context.
One more question.
We also made a cross-cultural comparison and get to some impression that we cannot contrast two different nations, two different cultures, but need just to juxtapose them, put together and see the difference. But we cannot say what is better, what is less good.
Sure.
So is it your impression too?
Sure. So it's not just about which one is better, it's just different and it's relational. So the notion of culture is relational, it's dynamic. So yeah, as you can say, we can say it's different, but it's not like something is better or not.
It's actually about
So I'm wondering, these are results from questionnaires, right?
Right.
Do you have any feeling whether you would get the same results if you try to test them more, through actual use of robots, right? Like whether they would be whether they would be consistent with the perceptions of robot in actual interactions. So, would Americans actually dislike a social robot, right, etc.?
Sure. So I think there will be some differences if we do use another method. We use online survey because there is no studies like about this popular assumption about media exposure and religion. That's why we try to use online survey to see broader perspective on the things. But we definitely, that's our limitation, and there will be another step to go from this study, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next paper is actually from Journal HRI. This is very new from this year, and particularly these papers are chosen from the special issue on design paper, and here's the first paper from the special issue, and the title is "Movie Magic Makes Better Social Art," and the overlap of special effects and the character robot engineering given by Dr.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm absolutely one of the emerging perspectives. I've emerged from my workshop to put out a paper, and this is actually the outgrowth of about 7 years of work since I've started my own business doing these special effects style robots, and I don't expect to publish again, so this is, my one and done, hopefully. We'll see if there's anything else to say on the subject. But when I got into robots, I was a kid growing up, and this is my idea of what a robot is and should be, and it's got character, personality. There's a variety of these astromech droids. R2-D2 is just one of a series, of course. But he's got full of attitude, full of personality. It's a character, and character robots are actually the term I've been using to describe this suite of robots that have traits that I will describe throughout this presentation, and which is the push of that paper, the main theme of the paper. With this personality, though, we know that there's characters that have much more by way of personality. And we need to look no further than animation and video games to see how lifelike a synthetic creature can be. Pokemon's a great example, and just as I identified in the astromech droids, we have those same characteristics here, where you have hundreds of different varieties of characters, and they each command some portion of our brains where we have a slot in our mind for Pikachu, and that's different than the sort of maybe less energetic but still cheerful Squirtle. Is that the one? Yes, second from left. And me personally, I did a mental experiment which I describe in this paper, where I tried to imagine rather than a perfect robot, but a perfect character, a perfect social entity, and what sort of being would I want to interact with, say on a daily basis, say if it was performing work like a service robot, what would that be? And in my case, I came up with Kermit the Frog. I didn't come up with it, but that was the one that appealed to me the most. Now that we're live in person, one moment. Ta-da! So this should explain, what I see as, I guess, the endpoint in character robots. If this could be brought to life, as has already been done by Disney research, you go to Walt Disney World and you see that they're bringing animatronics technology. They're applying that and bringing character robots to life in a way. They're not quite to the level of autonomy yet, but if you just incorporated some interactive sessions, then you're almost there already. So my question is, why aren't we there? I'd really like to be able to ask Kermit a question and have him give me an answer. Why is it so difficult to be green? Or, what was some ancient pond wisdom? Or just sing me a song. Anything like that, very simple interactions, and I think that would be extremely compelling. And I go into more detail in the paper about this particular mental experiment with an ideal character robot. So just a bit of background, because this is the emerging perspective from a guy who's not usually involved that much in academia. My background is more engineering. I picked up some degrees in electrical engineering, computer science, and began my career for the first 7 years working in Army research. And I was part of the Robotics Collaborative Technology Alliance, and worked with how robots communicate in the battlefield and how they share information and that sort of thing. And on a technical level, it was very compelling, but it was not Pokemon, and it was not Star Wars, and so I started my own business. And that was building monsters for haunted houses, and actually that's a puppet, moving like a hand puppet on the controller, and then that will feed directly into the robot and train the robot about how to move. That way the puppeteer is involved. Because I think ultimately when we make character robots, if you're making something like Kermit, or any robot really that's got a personality, you are playing the role of a puppeteer. As a roboticist, you are a puppeteer. That's a tough pill to swallow, I think, for some hardline academics. But that work led me into doing some big film stuff. So any Lord of the Rings fans in there would thrill to the swords, elven swords I think those are in the background. I worked on The Hobbit and a few other movies, then that was the next step beyond having my own small business, which I still run, but being able to get involved in projects like this were amazing. So here again, we've got this series of goblins, and one of the traits of character robots that I've identified in the paper and I want to express to you is that even though these are all goblins, and actually a very specific kind of goblin, there's still dozens of varieties of individuals that dozens of individual goblins that we created, and having those characters in the film is essential to having a person, the audience, bond in some way with them as individuals, and not just goblin A, goblin B, but rather the one with the messed up face on the left and the one with a giant nogri in the back. I worked on some other films. This one I wasn't that involved in. I just learned how not to use that power file in the bottom. It was a cutting operation and we were grinding through plastic, but it was an experience. And Elysium, this is my one experience working on robots that kill people, portraying robots that kill people. Fortunately, I haven't actually been involved in that, but this was a model making project that had a few little electronic components. And interesting that the problem set that many of military roboticists are working on are also what's been being done in the film world that's approaching the same problem from actually kind of the same perspective as what effect will this here animatronic have on a person who's interacting with it, and then you have the audience as a separate bit, whereas in the battlefield it's people who might be observing a robot in theater performing its duties. So I just thought it was an interesting overlap between the real and film. After a few months of working on the big films, I moved back to Kansas City, which is where I'm located, and did this rocket building project. And more than anything, the character robots, the type of robots that I work on, one of the features that seems to keep cropping up is because we're not making a series of hundreds or thousands of them, we've got to kind of throw the thing together. In this case, it was a 4-day build. I think the budget was under $1,500 US dollars to build a rocket ship. It didn't fly, I should add. And so since then, I've been trying to get more involved in different communities that might be able to benefit from the same kind of work. Therabot is one. This is Professor Cindy Bethel's work, and my task in it is to try to synthesize, or try to merge the worlds of special effects and research robots. And in this case, it was how to pack 10 movement axes into something about the size of the Subway sandwich I had this morning. And it's an example of the Pareto principle, where we've got about 20% left to do, and it seems like it's expanding into 80% of the workload. But it should be a cool little robot once it's done. Another just below that is the participatory, I call it PD bot, participatory design, where the user experience is actually much more involved in how the robot is put together. So what if, like kind of Mr. Potato Head or Lego Mindstorm, somewhere in that spectrum, you could have a person actually click together robot parts and have it be a functioning robot of some kind. And then, of course, as the character robot slant is what sort of ornamentation, what sort of decoration, what sort of skins might be useful in having in this sort of kit type system. That's Professor Selma Simonovich that's doing that. And that hasn't been funded. We're hoping that that could go somewhere. I think it has high potential. And then, the haunted house and film stuff is still on the board. And toys, actually, I think, are a very fruitful area because they have the same design requirements of cost, while also being entirely focused on what sort of experience the person's having. So I've fortunately been able to team up with Hasbro on one small project, and I'm hoping that leads to some more things. I'll get into this more as I describe the different traits of character robots, but I just wanted to point that out because if anyone's looking for novel research platforms, I think toys are absolutely a great place to start looking. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about toys that I think are on the mark. So I spent a lot of time introducing myself because I think it's important to give a background of where I came from, just so you understand about why I'm describing things the way I am. I tend to look at robots into fitting into these 6 categories, and companion robots are where I think the character robot paradigm fits best. And it's kind of like taking entertainment robots, stuff that's for film or for toys or just purely for the emotional impact of the robot, and bringing that in, bringing the work performed so the companion's actually doing something functional. And everyone here, I'm sure, is more well-versed in that than I am, but that's my understanding of where the character robot best fits in. So having understood that, let's take a look at what those traits of character robots are. And the essay that I got published now goes much more into depth on what these 4 features are. But to give you an example, biological appearance is one of the 4 features, and why that works, or how it works. First of all, the scale. I just went from 0 to 1. And every robot that you see up here is one of my personal favorites, so I'm not dissing any robots. But as you can see on the left, there is a gaping hole in the back of the head, which tends to indicate that there's not brain matter, and there's not, as we see in people, as we see in animatronics or Pokemon or characters, there is consistency and uniformity in the type of embodiment that they have. And a lot of robots will graft together parts in a machine-like sort of way. Maybe that's, we found that's not as appealing to the United States even. And it's certainly not as good as creating the illusion of life, which is part of creating a character. It's been known throughout animation. If you go back and look at any sort of cartoon since the very first cartoons, there's always this coherence, this consistency in how the character is formed. Fur, skin, the eyelids merge well into the head. Just all these traits that give it, but it's biological, and that creates the biological bonds that we have. Clear, simple expression. Okay, yeah. One of the rules of thumb that I use for identifying how simple something is if you were to sketch this just with a piece of paper and a pencil, how many lines would you be making, and how many of those lines actually contribute to creating the character. On the left, we see that there's all sorts of mechanical parts that are really just supplemental to the eyebrows and the eyelids and the parts that are there to express features. Those don't actually contribute to the design, and in fact, they detract because they're drawing the eye away from it. And on the right, we see very simple eyebrow and mouth that's clearly indicating some sort of emotion. And I think that's preferable. As the work with autistic kids has shown, that they respond well to robots in part because there is this clear, simple expression. And for character robots, again, looking at animation as an example, having this clarity is useful. Good animation. I know good is kind of a throwaway word, but when I look for animation that I think is creating a good character, it's not so much how much animation is possible, it's what constraints were given to the animation so that the character itself is already embodying some of that personality. I'm sure that Curio could perform everything that the Snuggimal on the right could do, but the Snuggimal is already in the doggy play position, and it has 2 axes of movement. One is the head nodding a little bit, and the other is the tail wagging. And perhaps I should have had a video for this, but that one simple movement routine engenders a lot of emotion, and considering things like cost and the absence of extraneous lines means that the character has been fully formed much more confidently, in my opinion. And last is a recognizable personality. And this is, since the astromech droids that I mentioned at the very beginning and all throughout this, having a personality is, I think, essential to creating a character. Just as we meet each other, we're forming these mental slots that we're filling with who this character is as we meet individuals. Those slots are being filled with robots and puppets and cartoon characters and the like. And I think it behooves us to have an intention for what that character is, so that we are aiming the character rather than just having something be built up and accidentally happened upon. Because there is a character. Just as we're puppeteers when we create robots that interact with people, we're character creators in that every robot is going to have some sort of personality. As you can see here, the one on the right is, I forgot the name, D-Rex, I think. but it doesn't have to be angry, but in this case it does exude that emotion of ferocity very well. Pleo is fairly generic, although it's a wonderful robot, don't get me wrong. So again, I'm here to introduce myself and to get my one publication out there so you understand the kind of work that I do and what I'm hoping to continue doing. Please grab me. If this sort of character robot stuff appeals to you at some point, I have actually one more thing to show you, but these are the topics in order of what I like to talk about. And so as an example of character robot versus not very character robot, we have, hello, welcome to HRI 2014. This is a very simple design, and there's not a lot of those 4 traits that I discussed in this. So as an example of how to apply the principles of character robots, I took a bit of time, added some paint, added an actuator, and brought everything together so that it matches the hand a little better. This is has a bit more personality. It can express personalities a bit better. It can be surprised, be tired or whatever. And it has a more recognizable personality and is certainly more biological in appearance. And that's just an example of the kinds of things that I think would be worthy goals to work towards as we develop character robots. So thanks very much.
So it turned out that the next speakers are not registered here. Is this correct? Is Changon or Jae-Heng Park around? Oh, okay. Then I have to keep talking. All right. Okay, so we have time, so we can take questions.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what I perceive as a tension between designing robots, characters, for like specific purposes, for specific situation, which is what you have like in a movie or whatever. You know what the character is, versus designing robots that we want to use across different situations, and they may need to have one personality in one situation and another in another.
Right.
And then, what's your take on that?
Yep, that's case specific, I would say. Just as in movies, you have like a default position when you're doing a facial animatronic, and it's a very important design decision to say, will this face naturally be smiling, or will it be neutral, or will it be sad, and where are the eyebrow positions, where are the cheeks, and where do we put the motors, where do we put all these facial rigs? And that's just one example. That's the face that needs different facial expressions. But if you have something that's going to be, say, working with the elderly and also with children, those could be completely different design constraints, and maybe having something like a very strong personality wouldn't apply in that case. Does that answer your question? Is that what you...
Yeah. Well, what I'm after is what's what I see with all you're saying, all the things that you're saying are applicable kind of when I want to design a robot for a specific purpose.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how it applies to the more generic case.
Yeah, if your design constraint is that it needs to be more generic, then it's hard to make it very specific.
Well, yeah.
Right? What you could do, there is the option of having, say, an interior mechanical portion that's the same, and then have different skins that wrap around for different cases, and then that's actually done in films and that kind of thing also. That way the engineering only needs to be done once, and then the personalities for different user cases can be done on the fly. I mean, it's, any sort of design question is tough to really answer without really digging into the user case. Okay.
I have a very quick question.
I've sort of got a question which I've been pondering over a number of speakers. Can you define what a robot is? And the only reason I ask that is because we've got these human interactive type robots, but planes have got autopilots, which are they're able to respond to environment. They go where there's a predetermined goal. They're able to adapt, control. Is it simply computerised machinery, or are we trying to imitate humans? If that's the case, then we're into a whole world of social psychology.
Right. Yeah, I didn't spend much time on those 6 categories of robots that I displayed earlier, but certainly I have a very broad definition of what a robot is. I count washing machines as robots because they've got sensors and actuators, and there could even be some level of autonomy. My dryer can detect how dry things are. So I would describe all those as robots, and I certainly don't think that these principles I'm describing here apply to across the board. I would never suggest that.
Okay, here's the last paper from the chosen from the journal's HRI special issue on design paper, and the title is From Mechanical Metamorphosis to Empathic Interaction, a historical overview of robotic creatures, given by Dr. O.